feel a bit of a fraud in this presentation because it's about a project that Regia did quite some time ago now. COVID kind of has altered perception of time, so it doesn't feel like it was very long, but actually when we look back at it, the project kind of started 8 years ago, which is quite a long time. And it was not just me, I just happened to be the Living History Coordinator of Regia at the time. So I was really lucky that I could coordinate this project. The project, as it was, November 2016, we just finished a really good season of reenactment and we're thinking to the next year. And we have in Regia an annual show at Detling County Showground in Kent, which is an old airfield on top of a hill. And we put on over the previous few years, we put on a sort of a village interpretation with palisade and had a load of interactions. So we wanted to do something different, and sitting round at our Whittam, there was discussion, and somehow it was decided that it'd be a really good idea on top of an airfield, on top of a hill, to recreate a boat burial at a military odyssey where the theme is military all the way through, right through from ancient Greeks through to Vietnam and more recently Afghanistan, re-enactors. So every period under the sun, and we wanted to take a completely civilian find and interpret it to military odyssey. So
they get what they give them, don't they?
They do, yeah. And not only that, we were suddenly Regia Anglorum. Its name says Anglorum, Kingdom of the English, or the Angles, but UK focused. We were taking a find that was not in England or the UK, Norway, and outside our standard date period to interpret it. So we kind of, I'm a bit stupid really.
Ambitious.
So Oseberg, when you think Oseberg, you think this beautiful ship. Oh, wrong way. And this is the ship when it was, after it was excavated. It was discovered in about 1904. The excavations happened 1904, 1905. This is the ship being paraded through Oslo to its location at the ship museum that was built for it in Oslo. This is a picture of some of the excavations. And we know from the excavations and some dendro work that was done on it that it can't have been buried before 834 AD, but probably sometime really soon after that. I love this colourised photo, and this is courtesy of Kat Jarman actually, who shared it. Whether I don't think she took she didn't take the photo. I don't think she colourised it anyway, but she's who I've stolen this photo from. But it's a fantastic view of very early 20th century archaeology. It was archaeology, but not quite as we know it today. But that being said, archaeology of the period, this was groundbreaking in terms of their understanding of what they've got and their need to preserve everything that they could. And there was an awful lot of experimental work in terms of preserving wood, which the Norwegians are trying desperately to save now. There is a big project with Oseberg to try and save the wood because it's degrading now, having been out of the earth for 100 years. So Regia's challenge was, how do you reconstruct Oseberg on an airfield What was the site of Oseberg like in 834? Because actually, as reenactors, that's what we're doing. Most times we turn up to a show and actually if there's a specific event that we're recreating, it's a battle. Or it's the treaty of two parties signing something. It's not generally taking a find or a site and interpreting that site. So actually, we've bitten off quite a lot. We got nearly a year to plan it, but there was an awful lot of research that needed to be done, and it was a huge combined effort. It wasn't just me, it wasn't just the other officers in the society that were doing it. This was a Regia-wide project. So Regia has 600 to 700 members, sort of worldwide. About 50 of them are abroad, maximum, at any one time. But so you're looking at a pool of 650 people that you can ask for help. And actually, not every one of them did, but a hell of a lot did. And it's amazing what, as a reenactment community, we can do as a community and pull together to pull something off. Now, the obvious thing that we needed to start off with was a ship. Now, Regia's lucky, we've got plenty of boats knocking around. Some of them are in better condition than others. Some of them are more accurate than others. We've got some, what we call the plastic fantastics, which are fiberglass and concrete ballast and goodness knows what. Which are closer in size to the Oseberg ship than any of our wooden boats, but they're much harder to transport because you have to get a low loader and it costs lots of money. Whereas our biggest wooden boat, the Bear,
which invades small Scottish towns.
Sorry?
Which invades small Scottish towns.
It does invade small Scottish towns, yes. A few years ago it took the power out of a small Scottish town. But we'll not go there. But it is 2 inches shorter than the maximum length you are allowed to tow behind a car. So it means that it is actually usable relatively easily by the society. So we decided that we were going to put that as the centre of our display. And then we would research what might have happened around that boat and the burial and the grave goods in and all sorts. So I'm just there'll be a slideshow running now of literally hundreds of photos of what we put on, and I'll talk through some of the things that we did. So, first of all, we looked at some of the finds. So I've just pulled some random illustrations of finds from Oseberg that enabled us to kind of interpret what we wanted to do, and some of them are really clear what they are. Some of them you haven't a sodding clue what they are. And actually, one of the after effects of this project is I've become quite obsessed with trying to work out what some of the mystery objects are from Oseberg. And if you look at the catalogue for Oseberg and the stuff from the university and stuff, they are literally catalogued as mystery objects. And they could be anything, some of them. These are possibly some rattles. You get beautiful things like this chest, figureheads, all sorts of. There is so much there. It's incredible. Beautiful snips and combs. And one of the things that the Oseberg burial is, and kind of led to me doing stuff was there were lots of textiles, really good, and I decided I was going to make an interpretation of one of the costumes there. So there are two women buried on the Oseberg boat. One younger woman who's in her 40s to 50s, and an older woman who is 70s to 80s. And so it's quite handy, I had a mother as well. So she interpreted the older woman, and I interpreted the younger woman. We're both, I would like to say, younger than the people we were trying to portray, but anyway. And the younger woman was dressed entirely in red. Now, I think it was Astrid said red was is the wealthy colour in Norway, and dyes.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking, do they know which of them? Because everything was kind of all that.
That's the interpretation is that the younger woman was in the red and the older woman had some blue, some brown and other bits. So anyway, we made two costumes based on interpretations. Now there's no jewellery found in Oseberg. That could be for two reasons. It could be that, well, the grave was robbed fairly early on, and all the jewellery could just have been nicked. But there was an awful lot of very valuable stuff and exciting stuff found on the ship as well. So they missed a lot if they did take all the expensive metalwork. There's things like the Buddha bucket, which I think you might have seen. And there's all sorts of exciting metalwork that they could have taken and didn't. But it's equally possible that these were so upper class people, their costumes were entirely different. And there is a trend across Europe that the real elite want to be Roman. They want to be that Roman emperor, and so we took that influence and some of the discussions within the textile reports, and came up with possible interpretations. They are definitely not definite interpretations, and there are things that I would definitely do differently if I were to do it again. And so there are lots of layers of the red fabric. Depending on which bit of which chapter you read in the textile report, tells you it's 3 or 4 layers of wool, and there are discussions about the wool that contradict each other as well. So there's lots of contradictory evidence within the report, so it's quite difficult to pull it all apart. I know that the weaves on these are wrong because they should be tabby weaves, and they're not. I've got diamond twill because that's what I had in madder dye available at the time when I was doing it. So I would go back and change that. And my silk applique, I'm not very good at appliquing silk, and it's far too big. So I would definitely change that. But the patterns that are created are roughly right. So, or some of them anyway. I've not done all of them by any means. But there's a big spirally thing. There are little teardrop things. There are these V-shaped things on the screen, on the sleeves. There are what look like just loops. There are long strips that are just long strips. And interestingly, some of them, and I've not done it on here because I only found out about it afterwards, some of them are sewed on the reverse side, and it looks like it's reused silk. So I would definitely do that differently again. Then there is also a tiny section. Sorry, I've just probably interfered with my microphone as well to just completely spoil the recording. Sorry. You can see it more clearly on my sleeve because I've put it on the sleeve as well. This little looped embroidery design, and Oseberg is one of the few textile remains where there is embroidery associated with clothing. Actually, there are more Viking finds, I think, with embroidery associated with them than Saxon finds. But that might be to do more with textile preservation than interpretation, because manuscript evidence and things gives more indication of decorative bits on textile bodies. But anyway, going back aside, what we needed to do as a society was try and work out what would the boat burial be like. What would have happened when the event was happening? So there was probably some sort of party or wake or something, because there was, at the site, there is what is described as a feasting platform alongside the boat. There was also sacrificed animals, remains, which may well have been the result of feasting. In terms of the oxen, I don't think the 13 or 14 horses were the results of feasting, but there is an area that is interpreted as a feasting platform. So we decided, right, we're going to have a party. What happens at parties?
We drink.
Drink, fun and games. Now, we were slightly unfortunate, and Carrie and Tony, who were there, will remember how hot it was. It was sweltering, and I've already taken one layer of wool off, and I'd really like to take another layer of wool off, but I'm not going to because it would just be awkward. It was boiling hot. So we didn't actually do an awful lot of fun and games because everybody was just trying to keep cool as much as possible. But people got dressed up and they did all their hair all fancy, so there was people doing authentic, maybe not authentic, but possible interpretations of hairstyles. So they set up a hairdressing salon. Somebody was doing dry shaves with authentic razor blades. You'll probably see a slide of that at some point. There was all sorts of things. And some idiots went around in mail, and we thought we'd best have, we're at a military odyssey, we'd best have a bit of combat. So they created the military guys created a scenario where the inheritance of the boat was being, or the owners, the inheritance of the people buried in the boat was being disputed, so there was a bit of a tit for tat between two sides as to who was going to inherit everything. Just to give them a scenario to fight around, but really it was a very minor part of the show. We had a platform so that everybody could view inside our boat. Now our boat was about less than a quarter of the size of the Oseberg boat. But it did mean that when we were filling it with grave goods, it looked bloody cluttered, like the original did. Because there was no way we could get 7 beds and goodness knows what else onto that boat. But we filled it, and it really had that sensation of being a cluttered dumping ground. We had corpses, so there's me and my mum. And I have to say, it was the best show ever from that point of view, because I slept the entire time.
I did have to explain the snoring as the sounds of decomposition.
So actually, in terms of recollections of the actual show, I've got very few, because I was asleep for most of it. But we did as a society so much research. We set up, I didn't. The then authenticity officer wrote a complete set of spec about different cultures across Europe, because this was somebody who was important and very high status, and the likelihood was there may have been guests from other cultures coming to pay their respects in some way as well. So we just let our hair down as a society and let anything go in terms of culture that could be argued to be our Oseberg. So there weren't Chinese 9th century costumes, because that's a bit far-fetched, but we did have one or two that were dressed in Russ outfits. We did have somebody who had an incredible Byzantium interpretation that, well, I assume it was incredible. I don't know enough about Byzantium 9th century costumes, but there were all sorts of foreign dignitary style costumes allowed. We turned up just seeing that picture of the runestone setting up, and somebody just rocked up on Friday and went, "Here, I've made you a runestone." Now I know there isn't a runestone at Oseberg, but you know, there might have been. It got to that stage of like, well, actually, you know, this is a party. This is 9th century Norway party. Let's have a runestone to celebrate it. It was just an incredible bringing together of all the evidence we could. Now, there are some things that we might not have happened. We might not have been painting canvases at a funeral party, but, you know, Roland just...
It was a hot day, like you said. It was a great day to prove the canvas.
Yeah, it was a good day to prove canvas. But we had, as well as what might have been happening at the funeral, and we did look at things like Eoforwic. I can't say his name. Yes, him. And his description of her funeral. So we took some of that and had people recreate a possible interpretation of that. And we had visitors from all sorts of other societies who were really excited. So we were invited by Crusaders and Mercians. all sorts. But it was great to see the excitement of the reenactors coming to see what we were recreating. And just as a project, it's just a massive testament to what can be achieved if you put your mind to it with a lot of planning, of pulling together resources, pulling together evidence. We had a complete list, well, not a complete list of finds, but we had a huge list of finds that were on Oseberg, and it was like, can anybody source one of these or one of those? And so the whole society bought little things to put on that boat just to add. So, you know, somebody from Scotland had a sprang frame perhaps, and somebody else from the West Country had a chest, and we had chests full of grain. We had somebody sourced the cannabis that was on there, you know, all sort of everything was just all put together, and it's something that, as individuals, there was no way we could ever have done something like that. The cost alone and the amount of equipment that was bought by members must have totalled easily into 7 figures worth of reenactment gear. Now, there's nobody in this country who can do that to any level at all. I can only think of one person over in Scandinavia, whose name I shall not mention, who might have that money and has definitely made he's made some amazing contributions in some ways to reenactment. He's made some interesting contributions in other ways to reenactment. But he has progressed reenactment in some ways that, you know, there's a reconstruction of a massive cauldron that would never exist if he'd not done it, for example. But we, as a society, could bring together and put something on spectacular. And I think that's something that, particularly in the UK, it's not so easy in Scandinavia because we're not big. There aren't the big societies like there are in the UK, but we can do occasionally. It's not a regular thing to do because this took so much planning. I had to hire scaffolding to build the viewing platform, which Tony beautifully built for me when I hired the scaffolding in. But things like that don't happen overnight. They have to have planning, and it's a lot of work by a lot of people to pull something off. But it's something that I'm really proud to have been part of, and really lucky to have been part of, and it would be great to see something akin to this happen again in the future.
You want a Oxstad next time, don't you?
We could dig Oxstad. It'd be really nice if somebody else wanted to coordinate it as well. I've got a lot more grey hairs than I had back then. I'm sure this helped. But so here are some of our other foreign visitors and the Mercians.
That is the Mercians.
It is the Mercians, yes. And this is kind of. It's led me and Pat, my husband, to really get obsessed with Oseberg and the mystery objects, and some of them not so mystery. Now this is a limb from Oseberg that is often labelled now as the Oseberg tablet limb. If you look in the original publications, it is not the tablet limb. It is called the long loom, I think, or something similar. And there are other looms that are called the tablet looms. There are no illustrations of them, which is frustrating. They're probably fragmentary bits, and there is the famous picture of the tablet still with all the wefts. And it's definitely not on that loom, but it appears to be on some sort of loom, and that's probably the tablet looms. I wonder, and it's something that I will get round to doing, is this in fact for weaving lengths of cloth and you've got a horizontal weft warp that goes round and round and round, and you basically form a tube of fabric or a long length, and possibly your warps are zigzagged with a holding thread that you can expand as your tension builds up to produce fixed lengths of fabric, because the distance of that between the two posts doubled is a just perfect length to make a tunic. If you made a whole piece of cloth that went effectively round it.
I haven't got photos.
So is that a possible interpretation? Is that what a long loom was?
Somebody in the VME
There are
has got
all sorts of things, but we've become obsessed.
what some people describe as a Lucy.
Interpreting things.
Others have
I haven't got
interpreted as a
photos.
picture. And actually, I think it was Ashley said, that's
somebody in the VME has got a copy of.
and so a member of the VME has been
describes a
experimenting
lucid,
with it, and she says it's a game changer in terms of
picture frame.
because
And actually, I think it was Ashley said, that's.
and it makes cheese making so much easier.
And so a
there's a
member of the
really
VME
long
has been experimenting with
baton
it, and she
thing.
says it's a game changer
It's
in terms
described
of
as a mystery object.
because
Clearly a sword
it
beater,
frees per hand,
but it's just
and it
described
makes
as a
cheese
mystery
making
object.
so much easier.
There are There are
there's a really
weird,
long
wacky, there's things like that looks like a
behind
solid
the
wooden modern
thing
handbag.
that's described as a mystery object. It is clearly a sword
But we
beater.
want
it's
to
just
make
described
these
as a
things
mystery
and
object.
play with them.
There
So
are
if you
so-
see something
there
as a
are
mystery object, particularly if it's made of wood,
things that
from
looks like a
Oseberg,
sword wooden modern handbag.
or anywhere else, and you want us to play with it, this is our legacy from this project.
Want to make
Let us know
these
the
things.
details. We'll have a go at
and
making
play with
it.
them. So if you see something
let
as a
you have a
mystery
play.
object,
But we want to know the result. You know,
or
that's the
anywhere
only
else,
deal on it.
and
But
you want us to play with it, this is our legacy.
yeah, I
from
guess
this project.
that's kind of
Let
where
us
I'm
know
at with it,
details.
really.
We'll
I
have
hope
a go
I'm
at
not
making it.
overrun. I
Give
don't
it
know.
to you and let you have a play.
No, it's quite all right. Thank you very much. So we've got time for just a couple of questions, and I want to be clear: questions, not remarks. Or I just wanted to say we want to encourage, talking to these experts about these things. If there are any remarks, you can definitely talk about them at the very end when we've got, I think, about half an hour free time. Okay. So is there anyone have anything specific?
We said there was a possible sort of complicated emulator
It's the silk applique, we don't know the layout of it. So I used Roman influences to interpret as a possible interpretation of how it could have been, rather than knowing for sure. So it might have been
We don't know
a
the
completely
layout.
different layout.
So
The shapes themselves
Roman
are
influences
right, so too big.
to
on this.
interpret
Um,
as a possible
but
interpretation of how it could have been.
How they were laid out
rather
is
than
anybody's guess.
knowing for
That
sure. So it might have
hasn't
been
recorded,
a completely
and
different layout.
so without a time
shapes
machine, we're not going to
themselves
know exactly.
are
But that's
right, so
one
too
of
big
the
on this.
suggestions, and it is
But
one of many
how they were laid
suggestions
out is
as
anybody's
to
guess.
interpretations.
hasn't
There
been
were
recorded,
interpretations that it was
So without time
a
machine,
seer,
we're never going to know exactly.
But
that's one
and
of
there's a
the
metal wand,
suggestions, and it is
or
one of
distaff,
many
depending on
suggestions
what
as
kind of
to
interpretations you go
there were
with.
interpretations
So
that it was,
I know, for
a seer,
example, Cambridge
and
University
there's a metal
go on
wand,
extensively on their Norse course about the fact that she's a
what
witch.
kind of
And,
interpretations you go with.
it's all to do with witchcraft and stuff, but then you get other universities that interpret it completely differently.
Cambridge University.
So, it could be a distaff, it could be something else, it could be part of the rattles kind of equipment. Who knows? There are other interpretations that it's just the jewellery's been stolen, and actually there should be some very posh brooches.
Rattles kind of equipment. Who
Yes.
knows? There are other interpretations that it's just the jewellery's been stolen, and actually there should be.
Yeah, I think so.
This staff or
Yeah.
the staff, whatever, wasn't
Yeah, I mean, it could be like a sceptre or who knows?
Yeah, I think so.
That wasn't what I was going to.
So
My husband has just
something very
brought me
special.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like
something that we've interpreted. Now, Astrid will say that this is textile find.
Who knows?
Possibly. But equally, it could be just a fancy spatula. Because in Oseberg, there are lots of very, very fancy things that appear to be over fancy just for the sake of being over fancy.
Possibly.
So,
but equally, it could be just a fancy spatula. Because in
Oseberg,
there are lots
of
very
hands,
fancy things
but I
that
can
appear
also
to
do
be
it.
over fancy just for the sake of being over fancy. So,
But I'll have to speak to everybody.
it's another mystery item.
Stuart.
There are lots of hands, but I
Yeah, I think
can
we can take one more and then we can save the rest for after.
but I'll happily speak to it.
There's also going to be a lunch
To be
break
honest,
too.
there wasn't huge amounts of things that were made specifically for it, but I think the favourite thing that was made specifically for it, and it wasn't mine that I've ended up with, but
To be honest, there wasn't a huge amount of things that were made
The tent
specifically for it, but I think the favourite thing that was made specifically for it, and it wasn't mine that I've ended up with, but
you can just see the frame here.
so
That was an
the
old
tent here.
tent frame that was rotting at the bottom and was unusable. But
So
we kind of
you can just see
butchered
the
it,
frame here.
and it sits
That was
beautifully
an old
on the
tent
sides of the
frame
boat.
that was rotting at the bottom.
And as a
and
resource
was unusable.
for Regia
But
to be able
we
to
kind of
show
butchered
different
it,
interpretations of
and
how
it
boats
sits
were used.
beautifully
Because the tents that
on
have been
the sides
found
of the boat.
are all associated with boats.
And
So
as a
is it
resource,
it's either something
for
funerary
Regia
or it's the means of
to be able to
accommodation on boats, and they've just
show
then
different
used it in the
interpretations
funerary
of how
context
boats were
as well.
used.
But
Because the
I think
tents
that's my
that have
favourite
been
thing
found
that I've
are
taken
all
away
associated
was
with boats.
being
So
able to
is it
experiment
it's
and
either
play
something
with
funerary or it's the
tent
means of
that was
accommodation
made,
on boats.
and the canvas
they've
we just used for
then
sail.
used it in the funerary context
over.
as well. But I think that's my
and yes, I think
favourite
that's
thing
my
that I've
favourite
taken away.
that was
Being able
as a
to
result of
experiment
it all,
and play
and my
with
kind of obsession with
a tent
mystery
that
objects
was
and
made, and the
cataloguing
canvas we
as
just
well,
used to sail
which
up and
is a
over.
bit ridiculous.
And yes, I think that's my favourite thing.
Thank you.
Which is a bit ridiculous at times.
Thank you so much.